There's a strange truth about the human mind that most people never dare to face. We talk about freedom, independence, and strength, but in the quiet corners of our thoughts, something darker whispers. It tells us that we don't really want freedom. We want comfort. We want the illusion of safety. We want chains, as long as they shine like gold. Nietzsche once said, "Man is a rope stretched between the animal and the Obermensch." But the truth is, most never walk that rope. They hang from it. They let it bind them because it's easier to live with limits than to face the terror of freedom. Every era, every society, every belief system has promised liberation, but look closer and you'll see it's always a trade. Freedom in exchange for obedience, peace in exchange for submission, happiness in exchange for surrender, and we take the deal every time. Nietzsche understood this psychological paradox, that people crave what imprisons them. They worship authority, seek validation, and cling to moral systems that make them feel small. Because being small feels safe. If you can blame the system, the gods, or your upbringing, you never have to blame yourself. You never have to carry the unbearable weight of freedom. Freedom sounds noble when we say it, but Nietzsche knew it's horrifying when you feel it. To be free is to have no excuses left, no one to blame, no one to follow. Only your own will, naked, trembling, and accountable for everything it creates or destroys. That's why so many minds crave their chains, not because they love suffering, but because they fear the chaos of their own power. They would rather live in a cage and call it peace than step into the unknown and risk becoming something greater. Pause. Music deepens, a darker undertone creeps in. Think about how early this begins. From childhood, we're trained to obey, to be good, to be nice, to follow rules made by people who stopped questioning long ago. We learn that comfort is the reward for conformity, that obedience brings love, that disobedience brings isolation. By the time we're adults, the pattern is complete. We no longer need a master. We carry one inside us. A voice that says, "Don't stand out, don't ask too much, don't risk losing what you have." And so we shrink, we bow, we trade our potential for belonging. Nietzsche called this the slave morality, the mindset built on guilt, submission, and resentment towards strength. In his view, most people live as slaves not because they're forced to, but because they choose to. They hate the strong because the strong remind them of what they could be and never became. Here's the darkest part. This craving for chains doesn't feel like slavery. It feels righteous. It feels moral. We call it humility, faith, loyalty. We wrap our fear in virtue and convince ourselves we're good people for staying small. But underneath that goodness hides resentment. The kind Nietzsche called ressentiment. The weak invent moral codes that punish strength and then claim moral superiority for doing so. They say, it's wrong to dominate. It's wrong to desire too much. It's wrong to love yourself too deeply. And so, the human spirit forgets its own power, slowly sedated by its own obedience. Nietzsche saw this happening everywhere, in religion, in politics, in love. He believed that humanity's greatest sickness was not cruelty or greed, but weakness disguised as virtue. A sickness that tells you to kneel and makes you thank your master for the privilege. You see this in the modern world, too. People addicted to comfort, validation, and social approval. They scroll, they consume, they obey trends, all while believing they're free. They call it self-expression, but it's imitation. They call it individuality, but it's conformity dressed up as choice. They crave the chains of belonging because true independence feels unbearable. Nietzsche wrote that the most spiritual human beings experience their most painful tragedy in recognizing what the herd does not want to see. The herd does not want truth. The herd wants peace, and peace is only possible when everyone thinks alike. So what happens when someone breaks free, even slightly? The herd turns on them. Mockery, rejection, accusation. The free thinker becomes the villain because his existence exposes everyone else's self-deception. But here's the twist. Even the one who tries to escape is never fully free. The mind is clever. It builds invisible prisons. Even rebellion can become a form of slavery if it's driven by the need for validation. Even the desire to be different can turn into another chain. That's the cruel irony of the human psyche. It disguises fear as reason and control as virtue. It tells us we're moral when we're really just afraid. It tells us we're kind when we're just avoiding conflict. It tells us we're thoughtful when we're just too paralyzed to act. Nietzsche's philosophy wasn't just an attack on society. It was a mirror for the individual. He wanted to expose how much of our morality, faith, and behavior is rooted in fear. Fear of rejection, fear of chaos, fear of freedom. To live without those fears is to live dangerously, and Nietzsche believed that danger is where life begins. He once wrote, "Build your cities on the slopes of Vesuvius," meaning live close to destruction, because only then will you truly know what you are capable of creating. Music shifts, quieter, more introspective. If you've ever felt the pull between who you are and who you're told to be, you've felt this conflict. Part of you wants to rise, to think freely, to speak honestly, to live without apology. But another part pulls you back, whispering that it's too risky, that you'll lose people, that you'll lose love, that freedom will cost you everything familiar. And that voice wins most of the time, because comfort is seductive. The chains don't hurt, not at first. They feel warm, they feel safe, until one day you wake up and realize that every decision you've made was shaped by fear, and every belief you hold was chosen to keep you small. That's the moment Nietzsche wanted you to reach. The moment of disgust with your own comfort. He believed that only through this disgust can the individual begin to transform, to destroy the false self built by obedience and fear, and to create something original, authentic, and dangerous. But the path is brutal. To free yourself from chains, you have to face the part of you that loves them. You have to confront the comfort of being told what to do, the pleasure of being pitied, the security of belonging to the herd. You have to admit that you were complicit in your own imprisonment. Most people will never take that step. They'll keep calling their chains values, their obedience virtue, and their cowardice peace. They'll spend their lives defending the very systems that keep them powerless, because it's easier to call the cage sacred than to face the terror of walking out. Music swells, a mix of melancholy and intensity. That's the heart of Nietzsche's dark psychology, the idea that the human soul is not broken by its masters, but by its own willingness to obey them. We crave order more than truth. We crave control more than freedom, and in doing so, we become the architects of our own suffering. Pause. In the next part, we'll go deeper into what happens when someone finally dares to break the chains, what freedom actually feels like, and why, once you taste it, you can never go back. Freedom begins quietly, not with celebration, but with fear. The first moment you realize no one is coming to save you, that every meaning, every rule, every comfort you've ever known was chosen for you. There's a silence that fills the air. It's heavy, it's cold, and for a moment, you almost wish you could go back. Nietzsche called this the beginning of self-overcoming. He believed that before a person can become truly free, they must first experience a collapse, a death of everything false inside them. The moral codes, the beliefs, the borrowed opinions, the small ambitions, all of it has to crumble. Only then can something real begin to grow. Most people never reach this point. They sense the edge. They feel the wind from the abyss, and they step back. But the few who don't, the ones who dare to look into that darkness, discover something terrifying. They find not emptiness, but possibility. They find that the walls keeping them safe were also keeping them weak. The music deepens, more tension, a heartbeat returns. This is where Nietzsche's idea of the will to power comes alive. It isn't about control over others. It's about mastery over the self, over fear, over comfort, over the quiet voice that says, "Stay small." It's the raw, instinctive force that drives life to grow, to create, to dominate its limitations. And when that force awakens, you stop asking for permission to exist. But make no mistake, the moment you start to rise, the world will notice. The herd always senses rebellion. They'll call you arrogant. They'll say you've lost your way, that you've become selfish or dangerous. They'll remind you of the chains you left behind and call it wisdom to wear them again. They'll say, "Be humble. Don't forget where you came from." But what they really mean is, don't remind us of what we could be. Nietzsche saw this pattern everywhere. The moment someone begins to think for themselves, the herd feels threatened. Because your freedom makes their obedience visible. Your strength makes their weakness undeniable. So they'll try to pull you back, not with violence, but with guilt. And that's the hardest chain to break. Not the external ones, but the emotional ones. The guilt of leaving others behind. The fear of becoming the villain in someone else's story. The loneliness that comes from walking alone. But Nietzsche would tell you that loneliness is sacred. It's the price of becoming who you are. He called it becoming what one is. A lifelong struggle against imitation, against comfort, against the herd's hypnosis. The music slows. Soft strings begin to build. Imagine standing on a mountain after years of crawling through darkness. You've lost the crowd. You've lost your idols. You've lost everything that once made you feel safe. And yet, for the first time, you feel something pure, not happiness, not peace, but intensity, the pulse of existence itself. The realization that you are both the prisoner and the key. That's the paradox of liberation. It's not gentle, it's violent. It tears away everything that isn't yours until all that remains is your will, raw and untamed. And with that will comes creation. Nietzsche believed that the highest form of life is the creator, not the artist or the thinker alone, but the one who dares to give their own law, their own meaning, to the world. He called this the spirit of the Übermensch, the overman, the one who transcends herd morality and creates values from strength instead of weakness. But this isn't about ego. It's not about domination for its own sake. It's about refusing to live as a shadow of other people's ideals. It's about replacing guilt with growth and submission with creation. In dark psychology terms, it's a kind of rebirth through destruction. The old self dies, the obedient, the conformist, the dependent, and from that death, something untamed emerges, a mind that no longer craves its chains, because it finally sees them for what they were, a form of control disguised as love. Say low rumble of sound, like thunder far away. But here's the truth Nietzsche never sugar-coated. Freedom doesn't end suffering, it multiplies it. When you start living by your own values, every mistake is your fault. Every failure, every fall, it all belongs to you. There's no one to blame, no master, no God. Just you and the weight of your own choices. And yet, this is what makes life meaningful. When suffering belongs to you, it transforms. It becomes a test of strength, not punishment. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What can I create from this?" that question. That moment when you take your pain and turn it into power. That's the moment you stop being a slave. Nietzsche once wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." That chaos, your contradictions, your fears, your desires, isn't a flaw. It's your raw material. It's what makes creation possible. But the herd teaches you to fear it, to hide it, to suppress it until you become predictable, manageable, ordinary. And that's how the chains tighten again. So the real work isn't just breaking free once. It's staying free. It's resisting the quiet urge to belong at any cost. It's choosing the solitude of authenticity over the comfort of imitation. It's living each day with the awareness that the herd will always call you lost. Because to them, freedom looks like madness. The music slows, becomes haunting and reflective. If you ever reach that point, when the noise of the world fades and you hear only the sound of your own thoughts, don't run from it. That silence isn't emptiness. It's the space where your true will begins to speak. It doesn't speak in moral rules or commandments. It speaks in urges, in visions, in the strange pull towards something you can't fully explain. That's your will to power. That's life itself, trying to expand through you. And that's what Nietzsche wanted for humanity. Not obedience, not peace, but intensity. A kind of existence so alive, so aware, that it burns through illusion. He didn't want us to be comfortable. He wanted us to be awake, to stand in the fire of our own becoming and refuse to look away. Music builds toward the final minute, deeper, heavier, then slowly softens. So, when you feel that inner conflict, that war between the self that obeys and the self that wants to rise, remember this. Freedom doesn't feel good. It feels heavy. It feels lonely. It feels like standing in front of the ruins of everything false and realizing there's no script left to follow. But in that ruin lies the beginning of power. The power to build yourself from nothing. The power to say yes to life, even when it hurts. The power to look at your chains, not with hatred, but with understanding, and know they were never forced upon you. You chose them, and now you can choose differently. Music fades to a single note, soft, fading into quiet, because the mind that craves its own chains can also be the mind that breaks them. And once it does, there is no going back.